The deep space freighter. The Ascendant drifted silently through the vast emptiness of the galaxy. Its sleek, dark hull gleamed in the dim light of distant stars, carrying a seasoned crew of explorers on a routine journey to chart new areas of space. The crew, though experienced, was always on edge in the unknown. Captain Olivia Raines stood on the bridge, her eyes scanning the endless blackness outside, thinking of the endless possibilities that lay ahead. But it was the unexpected beep from the communications officer that broke the stillness. Lieutenant Sarah Vega, always alert, looked up from her console, a furrow in her brow. "Captain, I'm picking up a distress signal," she reported, her voice tense. At first, the message seemed like any other, but as she decoded it, her expression turned more serious. The signal was clear, but encrypted, originating from a planet far beyond any known human territory. What caught their attention even more was the technology behind the signal. It was unlike anything the crew had encountered. It was far too advanced, far too sophisticated for any species they knew of. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. A distress signal from an unknown alien civilization was rare, but one that seemed to hold such advanced tech, that was unusual and perhaps dangerous. The question was, should they investigate, or was it a trap? Captain Raines stood silently, for a moment, weighing the decision. She knew the risks: alien technology, mysterious signals, and unknown threats. But there was something more pressing in her mind: the possibility of discovery. She couldn't ignore the potential of learning something new, something that could change everything they knew about the universe. She looked at her crew, each member willing to follow her anywhere. "Set a course for the source of the signal," she said firmly. "Prepare for anything." As the Ascendant adjusted its course, the ship moved toward the distant planet. The journey seemed endless, but as they approached, the planet began to take shape on the monitors. It was large, shrouded in a haze of clouds, with deep green and brown tones visible on the surface. The strange thing was that there were no signs of life, no cities, no movement, just an eerie stillness. The signal was coming from orbit around the planet, from an old abandoned space station. The station's silhouette came into view, dark and broken. Its massive frame looked like it had once been a marvel of technology, but now it was in ruins. Parts of it floated aimlessly in space, its outer hull cracked and scorched, evidence of some kind of violent conflict. Yet, despite the damage, the signal continued to pulse, faint but steady. The crew carefully maneuvered the Ascendant closer to the station, their ship's sensors picking up scattered debris, signs of battles long past. "There's no sign of life," said Commander Jack Stone, the ship's second-in-command, his voice tinged with caution. "It's abandoned. But why is the signal still going out?" The more they scanned, the more questions emerged. The station had clearly been attacked. Its systems fried, some of its walls torn apart, and several sections were completely missing. But even with all the destruction, the distress call continued to echo, almost desperately, as if pleading for help. The message was simple, yet it carried a sense of urgency, and it left the crew with a feeling that something was terribly wrong. Captain Raines couldn't shake the growing unease in her chest. "We'll board the station," she declared. "Prepare. A team for a recon mission. Something about this doesn't sit right with me." The decision was made. The crew was going in, despite the risk. As the airlock opened and the crew suited up for the mission, a chilling silence filled the ship. The unknown awaited them on that abandoned station. Every step they took toward the wreckage felt heavier, and a sense of foreboding seemed to grow. With every passing second, they didn't know it yet, but by responding to this alien SOS, they were about to make a series of choices that would have rippling consequences across the galaxy. What had started as a simple investigation of a mysterious signal was quickly becoming something much more dangerous, something darker. And the Ascendant's crew had just walked into the heart of it as the Ascendant descended into the atmosphere. Of the mysterious planet, the crew couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. Captain Olivia Rains stood at the helm, eyes narrowed, her mind racing. The planet below was a wasteland, its surface scarred by time and battle. The remains of alien cities lay scattered like forgotten bones, their once grand structures reduced to rubble. Strange machines, some broken, others still functional but eerily silent, were half buried in the sand. There was something unsettling about it all. The civilization that once thrived here had long since perished, leaving only the ghosts of its glory days. As the ship descended, Captain Rains couldn't help but wonder if the signal they had followed here was a warning, a trap set by forces far beyond anything they had imagined. The distress signal, once faint, had grown stronger as they neared the planet. Yet, despite its clarity, the true origin of the transmission remained a mystery. It seemed to be coming from the ruins of the alien station, but the more they studied the signal, the less sense it made. It was too organized, too precise for something so ancient. The crew had expected to find only the remains of a long-lost civilization, but now it seemed like they had stumbled upon something far darker. Suddenly, the calm silence of space was shattered by a warning from the ship's sensors. Commander Jack Stone, who was monitoring the readings, looked up from his console, his face pale. "Captain, we've got a fleet approaching, large and fast." The entire bridge fell silent as the crew scrambled to make sense of the situation. The sensors confirmed it. A massive alien armada was headed directly toward them, its ships glowing with the unmistakable signs of advanced weaponry. It wasn't just one or two ships, there were dozens, if not more. The Tsurar, a name that struck fear into anyone who had ever heard it, were on their way. The crew of the Ascendant had just walked straight into the heart of a galactic war zone. The Tsurar were no strangers to conflict. Known for their brutal tactics and unyielding hunger for conquest, they had swept through entire star systems, leaving devastation in their wake. They were a race built for war, with technology that surpassed anything humanity had ever encountered. The situation was rapidly becoming more dangerous. The fleet was not responding to any communications from the Ascendant, nor did it seem interested in negotiating. The Tsurar were here for one reason: to conquer. The crew's discovery of the alien SOS had been a mistake, one that had led them directly into the path of an unstoppable war machine. The Tsurar saw humanity as nothing more than an insignificant obstacle, another species to be crushed beneath their heel in their endless drive for domination. Captain Rains paced the bridge, her mind racing. The signal they had followed was no longer just a call for help. It had been a trap all along. The Tsurar had lured them in, hoping to bait them into making a move. The crew of the Ascendant had unwittingly fallen into their hands. As the fleet approached, Rains knew that there was little time to prepare. The Tsurar would not hesitate to destroy them if they stood in the way. But humanity wasn't known for backing down. She would not let her crew become just another casualty of an alien war. "Get us out of here, Lieutenant Vega," she commanded, her voice calm but firm. "Plot a course for the nearest jump point. We need to get out of range before they have us cornered." But it was too late. The alien fleet was closing in too fast, and there was nowhere to hide. As the Tsurar ships neared, the crew could see them now. Vast, dark warships that seemed to block out the stars as they passed. Their weapons were charged, their intent clear. The Ascendant was no match for their firepower. Captain Rains had faced dangerous situations before, but nothing like this. The Tsurar were not just coming to investigate, they were coming to obliterate anything in their path. The crew scrambled to make last-minute preparations, setting up defensive systems and bracing for impact. But as Rains watched the fleet advance, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. They had made a terrible mistake by following the signal. Now, the only question that remained was whether humanity would survive to learn from it. The first shots from the Tsurar fleet had shattered the quiet of space. The Ascendant was caught off guard, the force of the enemy's firepower shaking the ship to its core. Yet, the human crew had no intention of surrendering. They had underestimated humanity before, and now, the Tsurar would learn the hard way just how dangerous Earth's Deathworlders could be. Captain Olivia Rains stood firm on the bridge, her expression one of calm determination. Humanity was no stranger to survival. Earth's history was filled with battles against overwhelming odds. They had survived brutal conditions, learned from the harshest of environments, and adapted to thrive in chaos. They had fought, bled, and persevered, and now they would do the same among the stars. As the Tsurar fleet bore down on them, Captain Rains turned to her crew. They might have been outnumbered, but they weren't helpless. The Ascendant had one weapon that the Tsurar couldn't predict: the ingenuity of its crew. They had fought battles before, faced impossible odds, and won by outsmarting their enemies, and now they would do it again. "We won't win by strength alone," she said, her voice cool but resolute. "We'll fight smart. We'll make them chase us. Prepare the reverse-engineered tech. It's time to hit them where they least expect it." The crew set to work, using technology scavenged from previous encounters with alien races. It was risky. Reverse-engineering alien tech was no easy feat. But the humans had learned how to manipulate it for their advantage. As the Ascendant dodged incoming fire, the crew unleashed their first strike. A barrage of missiles, enhanced by their own modifications, tore through the weakest ships in the Tsurar fleet. The Tsurar were caught off guard, their shields barely holding as the Ascendant struck swiftly and decisively, taking out several of their smaller ships in quick succession. The enemy fleet was thrown into disarray, but the Tsurar were not easily defeated. They regrouped quickly, their massive warships maneuvering into formation, retaliating with an overwhelming counterattack. The battle intensified, each side unleashing everything they had in a desperate struggle for dominance. The Ascendant shook under the barrage of enemy fire, but Captain Rains knew they couldn't keep fighting like this. If they stayed in a direct confrontation, their resources would soon be depleted. The Tsurar had the firepower to crush them. They needed to change the game. "Time to go off the grid," Rains said, her eyes narrowing. She turned to her tactical officer. "I want every available crew member on stealth missions. Hack their systems, jam their communications, confuse them. Make them think they're surrounded." The crew got to work. It wasn't just about fighting anymore. It was about getting into the minds of their enemies. The humans launched a series of guerrilla tactics. They hacked into the Tsurar's comm systems, sending false messages that threw their fleet into chaos. Stealth shuttles, cloaked and moving at the edges of the battlefield, infiltrated enemy lines, planting sabotage devices and spreading confusion. The Tsurar were powerful, but they were also predictable. They relied too heavily on their overwhelming strength and advanced technology, never anticipating that the humans would fight so differently. Meanwhile, the Ascendant itself became a ghost in the void, darting between asteroids and wreckage, striking at weak points in the Tsurar fleet. The humans used their surroundings, the debris from the earlier battles, to their advantage. They led the Tsurar into traps, directing them toward areas where their ships could be ambushed or disabled. Every time the Tsurar thought they had the upper hand, the Ascendant slipped away, vanishing into the darkness of space before they could retaliate. It wasn't just a fight for survival, it was psychological warfare. Every time the Tsurar regrouped, the humans struck in unexpected places, forcing them to think twice before making their next move. As the hours passed, the balance of power began to shift. The Tsurar, once so confident in their superiority, were starting to question their position. Their fleet was scattered, their ships damaged, their morale beginning to crumble. Captain Rains could see the change in the Tsurar's tactics. Their attacks were no longer as coordinated, their responses slower. The humans had given them a taste of chaos, something they weren't prepared for. Slowly, with every maneuver, the Ascendant and its crew were forcing the Tsurar into a deadly stalemate. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time since, the battle began. The Tsurar were no longer certain of victory. Captain Rains stood at the helm, her eyes locked on the enemy fleet. They weren't going to give up, not today. And if the Tsurar thought they had won, they were in for a rude awakening. Humanity had just shown them a glimpse of the storm that was coming. The battle raged on, the sound of weapon fire echoing through space as the Ascendant danced between the Tsurar warships, its crew pushing the limits of their ship and their own endurance. Captain Olivia Rains stood on the bridge, her eyes sharp, her mind racing. The Tsurar were relentless, but their arrogance had begun to show cracks. The humans had turned the tide with cunning and resourcefulness, exploiting every advantage they could find. The Tsurar, used to overwhelming their enemies through sheer firepower, were beginning to realize that this was no ordinary foe. And yet, in their frustration, they made a fateful mistake. The Tsurar commander, now seething with rage at the unexpected resistance, ordered a full-scale assault. His voice rang out across the communication channels, echoing with fury. "Destroy them! Burn their ship to the ground! No mercy!" The alien fleet responded with an explosion of firepower as they launched everything they had in a desperate attempt to break the Ascendant. The sky above the planet filled with streaks of deadly projectiles, raining down on the human ship. The Tsurar began an orbital bombardment, relentless in their effort to obliterate the humans. But the Tsurar didn't understand one crucial thing. Humans never give up. They had been forged in the fires of Earth's chaos, their very nature shaped by survival against constant threats. And while the Tsurar relied on sheer might, the humans had something the aliens could never comprehend: resourcefulness. The crew of the Ascendant had always been able to turn the odds in their favor, no matter how dire the situation seemed. As the bombardment rained down, Captain Rains quickly assessed the situation. "They're underestimating us," she muttered, her mind already working on a plan. The ship's sensors picked up the wreckage of several Tsurar ships that had been disabled earlier in the fight. It was risky, but it might be their only chance. "Lieutenant Vega, start reconfiguring our shields to deflect incoming fire. We'll need them to protect the ship while we move." The crew scrambled to follow orders, repurposing every piece of tech they could salvage from the battlefield. The Ascendant's damaged hull was no longer a weakness, it was an opportunity. They could use the debris from the destroyed ships to their advantage. Working quickly, they aligned the wreckage to create a false trail, luring the Tsurar fleet into the planet's gravity well, a treacherous area where the enemy's ships would be more vulnerable to attack. With the planet's dense gravity field in play, the Tsurar would have little room to maneuver. As the alien fleet followed the trail, the humans set their trap. They activated the planet's ancient defense systems, automated weapons long forgotten, left behind by the now-dead civilization. These ancient cannons, buried deep beneath the surface of the planet, came to life with a sudden, terrifying roar. Energy blasts surged from the planet's surface, hitting the Tsurar ships with devastating force. The aliens, unprepared for such an assault, found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire, their own technology turned against them. For the first time in the battle, the Tsurar were thrown into disarray. Their ships, once unstoppable, were now disabled and scattered. The arrogance that had driven them to believe they could easily crush humanity was shattered. The tide of the battle had shifted irreparably. The Ascendant's crew had proven something that no one, not even the Tsurar, could deny: humanity's ability to survive, adapt, and fight back against impossible odds. As the alien fleet struggled to retreat, Captain Rains transmitted a final message to the Tsurar commander, her voice cold and unwavering. "You came to conquer," she said, her words cutting through the silence of space. "But you will leave with a lesson. Humanity does not kneel." The message echoed across the vast emptiness, a declaration that would haunt the Tsurar for the rest of their lives. With their fleet in full retreat, the Tsurar were forced to abandon their conquest. They had underestimated the humans, and in doing so, they had made a fatal mistake. The battle was won, but Captain Rains knew this was only the beginning. The Tsurar would learn that humanity wasn't a species to be taken lightly, and in the end, it would be the Tsurar who would pay the price for their overconfidence. The Tsurar fleet had retreated, their once mighty armada scattered and broken. What had started as a confident assault on a weaker species had turned into a crushing defeat. The Ascendant emerged from the chaos, battered but victorious. The crew had fought with everything they had, their resourcefulness, courage, and determination, proving more than a match for the superior technology of the Tsurar. The warlike aliens, who had once looked down on humanity as nothing more than a minor obstacle, now faced a hard truth. The humans were not to be underestimated. They were not just survivors, they were warriors in their own right, and they would fight, not just to survive, but to win. Captain Olivia Rains stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The battle was over, but the weight of it still pressed on her. She had led her crew to victory against overwhelming odds, but she knew the cost. They were all battered, physically and emotionally, and the toll of the fight would take time to heal. Still, there was a sense of pride in the air. Humanity had proven its worth on the galactic stage. The Tsurar had learned a valuable lesson, one they wouldn't soon forget. In the aftermath of the battle, the humans stood as a force to be reckoned with, not just in the eyes of the Tsurar, but in the eyes of the entire galaxy. As the Ascendant made its way back to Earth, Captain Rains reflected on the events that had led them to this point. The Tsurar had been technologically superior, no doubt about that. Their ships were faster, stronger, and more advanced. But there was one thing that Tsurar had failed to account for: humanity's relentless will to survive. The human race had been forged in the harshest of environments. Earth itself had been a death world, a planet teeming with predators, natural disasters, and unyielding challenges. But instead of being broken, humanity had adapted. They had learned to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast every threat that came their way. And that was something no amount of superior firepower could ever replicate. The universe now knew what humanity was capable of when provoked. The so-called Deathworlders had shown that they would not roll over when faced with danger. Instead, they would stand tall, ready to fight back. The Tsurar had learned that lesson the hard way, and it would echo across the galaxy for years to come. The Ascendant had returned victorious, but Captain Rains knew that this victory was only a brief moment in a much larger story. The galaxy was vast, and there would be other challenges ahead. The Tsurar might have been the first, but they wouldn't be the last. As the ship approached Earth, the crew was hailed as heroes. News of their victory spread across the planet like wildfire, and the people of Earth celebrated their triumph over the alien invaders. But for Captain Rains, there was no time for celebration. She had seen firsthand the dangers that lurked in the dark corners of the galaxy, and while humanity had emerged victorious this time, there was always the possibility of something worse, waiting just beyond the horizon. The Tsurar had been a dangerous enemy, but they were not the only threat out there. The galaxy was filled with unknowns, and not all of them would be as predictable as the Tsurar. But Rains knew one thing for certain: humanity would face whatever came next with the same resolve, the same ingenuity, and the same unyielding spirit that had carried them through this battle. They had been tested, and they had prevailed, and if anyone, anywhere in the galaxy, dared to threaten Earth again, they would face the same relentless fury that had turned the Tsurar's invasion into a humiliating defeat. As the Ascendant made its final approach to Earth, Rains stood at the helm, her eyes focused on the stars ahead. This victory was hard won, but she knew it was just the beginning. There were countless worlds out there, many of them hostile, many of them dangerous. But Earth had a new reputation now, a reputation built on courage, resilience, and the unwavering will to fight for survival. And no matter what the future held, humanity would face it, as always, with courage and ingenuity.